After burying his wife, a retired millionaire hears an orphan whisper, "I saw your wife wasn't dead when they closed the coffin." Now he must choose: ignore the ghost or dig for the truth. The fog hung low over the hillside cemetery, softening the crooked rows of aging gravestones and muffling the sharp cry of crows overhead. A wind moved slowly through the iron fences, carrying the scent of pine and the faint bitterness of damp earth. Beyond the rusted gate, the last toll of a bell echoed like a heartbeat, folding into silence. Walter Sullivan adjusted his coat and stared at the fresh mound of earth beneath the white marker. Isabel Sullivan, resting place of the most beautiful wife. The lettering was pristine, too pristine. It hadn't had time to settle into memory yet. He didn't cry, not today. He stood, hands folded behind his back like an old soldier, and looked past the grave of his second wife toward the smaller, more worn headstone under the oak tree. Margaret Sullivan. His steps were slow. The grass beneath him still held dew, and the mud tugged at his shoes. He stopped in front of her stone and lowered himself with the effort of a man used to living alone, unhelped. He brushed a fallen twig from the marble and spoke as if she were standing beside him. "You always forgave me, and I always mistook that for weakness. You asked me once if I knew how to be kind. Maybe now I do, but it's too late to show you." He sat for a while, letting the silence settle until he heard a soft voice behind him. "She's not dead, you know." Walter turned, startled. A small girl stood a few feet away, tucked in a tattered coat 2 sizes too large, a knit hat slipping over her ears. Her boots were mismatched. There was dirt under her fingernails, but her eyes were alert. Too alert for someone that young. "What did you say?" She pointed to the fresh grave. "Isabel, that's her name, right?" Walter stared at her. "How do you know that?" The girl stepped closer, but stayed outside arm's reach. "I live here. Over there." She gestured toward the edge of the cemetery, where a rusted maintenance shed sat beside a tree line. "Used to be my mama and me. Now just me." Walter rose slowly. "That's not an answer." I heard her breathing. His hands stiffened on the top of his cane. "Excuse me?" The girl nodded, serious. "Night before they put the lid on. I sneak around at night sometimes. Mama didn't like it, but now there's no one to tell me not to." She took a step forward. "I saw her lying in the box, and when I got close, I heard this soft little breath. Like her, not loud, but real." Walter's mouth felt dry. "You're lying." "No, sir." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled something out, a small silver locket, old but polished clean. She was holding this, clutched real tight. He took it from her. The clasp was broken, but the engraving was still clear on the back. "To my dearest, always. W." Walter nearly stumbled back. He recognized it. He'd given that locket to Isabel during a night in Vermont, back when they still pretended their marriage meant something. The girl looked at him closely. "Is it yours?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned away, gripping the locket like a relic. "Who are you?" he finally asked. "Rosie." "Rosie? What?" She shrugged. "Just Rosie. Mama was Leanne. She's over there." She nodded toward a modest, crumbling marker near the edge of the grounds. "We lived in the back of that blue truck till she got sick. Then here." Walter glanced toward the road. A black maintenance vehicle sat there. Not blue, but there were tire tracks leading to a flattened patch of grass where another vehicle might have stayed. "I saw someone else too," Rosie added. "2 men came late that night. Big coats. One had a shovel. I watched from the trees. They took her." Walter turned to her again, eyes narrowing. "Took who?" "Isabel." Her voice didn't waver. They opened the box and pulled her out. He took a slow breath, not realizing how tightly he was clenching his jaw. "Do you expect me to believe this?" She didn't answer. Instead, she said, "You should talk to the old priest." He was weird that day. Said something was off about her skin. Too warm. Walter's eyes sharpened. He remembered the odd pause Father Ethan made at the end of the service, a hesitation just before the dirt fell. His phone buzzed in his coat pocket. An unknown number. He picked up. "Mr. Sullivan?" a voice asked. "This is Blake's office, the estate attorney. We need your signature on a document confirming ownership of the Lincoln watch. Someone inquired about its availability." Walter closed his eyes. "The watch is in my safe," he said automatically. But even as the words left his mouth, something inside him cracked. He looked back at Rosie. "You said she breathed?" Rosie nodded. She breathed. And she looked at me. What did her eyes say? The girl was quiet for a long time. Then, that she wasn't done yet. Walter looked at her with a doubtful gaze. He left, but his heart began to have the first ripples. The cemetery was quieter now. Morning sun filtered through thinning branches, painting faint yellow streaks across the damp stone. A light mist lingered where the ground dipped near the west fence, a place the sun never seemed to touch fully. Walter stood near Isabel's grave again, but not for her, not entirely. Rosie had returned, same tattered coat, same keen eyes, and she was watching him like a cat, waiting for a door to open. "You came back," she said, not surprised, not pleased, just observing. "You said I should speak to the priest," Walter replied. "You didn't?" "I will." Rosie was squatting now, pulling at some grass by the base of the grave marker. "I stayed here that night," she said. "After they brought the casket, but before the funeral. I was cold. Mama used to say the ground gives back a little heat if you lie real still. So I came here." Walter turned his gaze to her. "You slept beside the box." "Wasn't sleeping when I heard it," she said. "The breathing." Walter let out a sharp breath. "Rosie, it wasn't just the sound." She moved. That froze him. Rosie stood and brushed her hands off on her coat. She twitched. One hand. Like this. She made a small gesture with her fingers. Like she was trying to grab something. "And then?" he asked, quieter now. "I reached in. I didn't think. I just reached. I touched her chest. Right here." She pressed her palm flat against her own sternum, and she breathed in. Once. Deep. Walter looked down, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Rosie pulled something from her pocket, the silver locket. "I didn't steal it," she said. "She was holding it. I only took it after she stopped." He reached out and took the locket again, but this time with both hands. His thumbs found the engraving by memory. "To my dearest, always, W." He hadn't seen it in years. Thought maybe she'd lost it. Thought maybe she'd thrown it away. "You say she moved. She breathed. Why didn't you tell someone?" Rosie raised her eyebrows. "Tell who? The guy who buried her? He drinks half the day and forgets the rest." Walter narrowed his eyes. "Harry?" She nodded. "He was here that night too. You should ask him about the man in the long coat." Walter didn't answer. His fingers wrapped around the locket tighter now. "She looked at me," Rosie said suddenly, her voice low. Right before she stopped again, eyes opened halfway. Not scared, just angry. Walter looked up sharply. Angry? Like she knew something was wrong. Like someone did it to her. A light wind passed over them, enough to rustle the low weeds near the stones. The chill returned, creeping up Walter's spine. "I need to go home," he muttered. "Your house is close?" Rosie asked. 10 minutes by foot." Rosie tilted her head. "Can I come?" "I won't touch anything. Just warm up. My tent's soaked." Walter stared at her, uncertain. "I'll sit by the door, if it makes you feel better," she added. He hesitated longer than he liked to admit, then finally nodded. Only for a little while. The house was quiet, half awake like its owner. Dust softened the edges of furniture, paint peeled in polite silence. Rosie stepped inside like she was entering a museum. She paused in the foyer, staring at the long wall of framed photos. Most were missing. Just shadows remained where they'd hung. "Did they fall?" she asked. Walter followed her gaze. "I took them down." "Why?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned down the hall. "This way." In the living room, he left her with a blanket and went to check the safe behind the study shelf. The combination clicked out of habit. The door swung open. The box was there. The velvet wrap. But not the watch. He froze. Slowly, methodically, he unfolded the cloth. Empty. His breath caught. He stood for a long time, staring into the hollow where the heirloom should have been. The watch said to have belonged to Abraham Lincoln, the one he'd built his mythos around. Gone. He returned to the living room. Rosie was curled on the edge of the couch, her legs tucked under her, watching the fireplace as if expecting it to come alive. He said nothing. Neither did she. Then, without turning her head, she asked, "Did you lose something too?" He stared at her. "What makes you ask that? You look the same way my mama did when they took her necklace. Blank at first, then kind of hollow." "I lost a watch," he said flatly. "Important." He didn't answer. After a moment, Rosie pulled something from her coat again, a folded piece of paper. She handed it to him. A child's drawing, in wax crayon on the back of a diner receipt. A woman in a wooden box, eyes open. A little girl beside her. The locket in the woman's hand, bright silver. And something else on the woman's wrist. A circle, drawn heavy with grey. Walter held the drawing like a crime scene photo. "You drew this?" "That night. I thought I might forget, but I haven't." He folded the picture carefully and placed it in his coat. "I think I need to speak to someone," he said at last. "Who?" Rosie asked. "The priest." She nodded like that made sense. He reached for the phone and dialed the number of the old pastor who had performed Isabel's funeral. It rang twice. "Hello? Reverend Ethan?" A pause. "Walter Sullivan. It's been some time." Walter leaned forward, resting his elbow on the counter. "Yes, I just wanted to thank you for leading the service." "You're welcome. I wasn't sure if it brought you comfort." Walter hesitated. "I'm not sure I believe in much of anything anymore." The line stayed quiet for a moment. Then Ethan spoke, slower now. "There was something about that service that didn't sit right with me." Walter frowned. "What do you mean?" "When I leaned over the casket to offer the final prayer, I swear I felt warmth on her lips." Walter's breath caught. "Excuse me?" "It could have been nothing. Imagination, or the way the air held that day. But I've been burying people for over 40 years, and I've never once hesitated like I did then." Walter gripped the phone tighter. "Why didn't you say anything?" Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because I didn't trust my instinct that day. But maybe you still can trust yours." Then the line went dead. Walter stared at the receiver for a long time, the dial tone buzzing low in his ear. As he rose, Rosie looked up at him and said quietly, "If she's not in the ground, where do you think she went?" Walter didn't reply, because he didn't know, but suddenly he needed to find out. Rain tapped lightly against the tall bay windows, too soft to be noticed at first. The trees outside shifted with the wind, their bare branches scratching against the siding like old fingers testing for a crack in the walls. Inside the house, warmth didn't quite reach the corners. Walter sat at the edge of his desk in the study, the velvet wrap still open in front of him, crumpled now, useless, empty. He hadn't moved since returning from the living room. The fire had long gone cold. He ran his thumb along the crease where the watch should have rested. It was gone. Not misplaced. Not borrowed. He hadn't opened that safe in weeks. Hadn't needed to. There were things you didn't check unless you had to. Like a grave. A knock came from the hallway. Rosie. She hovered at the edge of the study, like a cat that wasn't sure it was welcome. "Do you have tea?" she asked gently. Walter blinked, startled by her voice. He nodded once, vaguely. She disappeared. A few minutes later, he heard the click of the stove and the rustle of tin boxes being opened. She moved around his house, like it belonged to no one. Maybe she knew it didn't. When she returned, he hadn't changed position. She placed a steaming mug on the corner of the desk and sat on the floor by the window, her legs crossed beneath her. "I didn't touch anything," she added. Walter looked up. "I know." Rosie sipped from her own cup. "You're mad," she said after a beat. "Not at me, though. At someone else." Walter finally spoke. "She had a key." "Isabel?" He nodded. "I gave it to her. Years ago. Do you think she came back?" "She didn't need to. She never left." He rose from the desk and crossed the room to a cabinet long left unopened. He knelt, pulled open the bottom drawer, and retrieved a folded linen handkerchief. Inside, tucked and pressed between two sheets of wax paper, was a letter. He unfolded it. Marjorie's handwriting, his former housekeeper. The letter had come a week before the funeral, crumpled, unsent, hidden beneath a pile of unopened bills. "Sir, I'm sorry I had to leave like this. I know you trust her, but I've seen her take things. I saw her with your watch, wrapped in red, 2 nights ago. She didn't know I was there. She never does. Be careful." He read it twice before pressing it flat on the desk. "I should have read this earlier." Rosie watched him, unmoving. "She asked me once," Walter said, "if I lost the watch, would I lose what it meant?" Rosie tilted her head. "What did it mean?" Walter stared at the fireless hearth. "It meant proof. That I stood for something once, that I'd earned trust." "You needed a thing to prove that?" "I guess I did." He took the empty velvet wrap and dropped it back into the safe, shutting it slowly. "She wanted it," he said aloud. Not to Rosie, maybe not even to himself. "She wanted it more than she wanted to be with me." "She took it?" Rosie asked. "She did." Silence settled between them. Then Rosie reached into her coat and pulled out a small, bent piece of metal. "I found this under the rug in her room," she said. "I wasn't looking. I just dropped my sock." Walter took the object. It was a curved watch clasp, the same brushed brass finish as the one from his heirloom. It still had a faint warmth to it. He turned it in his hand. "She was planning it," he said quietly. Rosie stood and wandered toward the bookshelf. Her finger traced the dusty spines of unread books. "My mama used to say people don't steal things. They steal meanings." Walter looked up. "She said the only thing worse than losing something was realizing someone never saw it the way you did." He stared at her, not for what she said, but how she said it, like she'd lived it already. Then she pointed to a leather-bound journal tucked between 2 tax guides. "What's this?" Walter took it from the shelf. It was a gift from Margaret, decades ago. He hadn't opened it in years. Inside was a note, written in Margaret's clean cursive. "When symbols fall apart, build new ones with your own hands." He sat down slowly. "Did she say that?" Rosie asked. "Number she wrote it. But I never listened." They sat in the silence that followed, not heavy, but deliberate. Rosie finally asked, So what now? Walter looked at her. The silver locket glinted faintly at her neck. She'd put it on sometime after the drawing. I need to find her, he said. Not to get the watch back. That doesn't matter now. Then what? To ask her one question. Rosie didn't press. She nodded and took another sip of tea. Walter looked out the window. The rain had stopped, but the sky hadn't cleared. Snow had started falling again, quiet and fine like sifted flour. It softened the ridges of old gravestones and turned the night into a whisper. The wind had stilled, but the cold pressed in close, like something listening. Walter leaned on his shovel at the edge of Isabel's grave. He had waited until well after midnight, when even the drunks in town had found beds or benches to die on. Rosie had fallen asleep under an Afghan by the fireplace. He left her a note. Don't worry. I'll be back soon. Probably. Now, standing above what the world called a final resting place, he felt anything but finished. If you're in there, and this is all a child's fantasy, then I'll close the lid again, he muttered. I'll let you sleep. He jammed the spade into the snow-hardened soil. But if you're not... Each shovelful came harder than the last. The ground, already disturbed once, fought back like it didn't want to be broken twice. His breath frosted in the air. His joints burned. The last time he'd held this shovel was when Margaret passed. He dug the first scoop, then two. Out of some stubborn pride, or maybe guilt. Maybe the same thing. Half an hour passed. Then an hour. The snow blurred his glasses and clung to his collar. At last, the spade struck something hollow. He dropped to his knees and brushed away the frost-laced dirt. The lid of the coffin, white lacquered wood, pristine, undisturbed. Almost. There, a thin sliver of metal had splintered along the seam. It looked resealed, badly. Walter's fingers hesitated, then gripped. He lifted the lid. Nothing, no body, no satin pillow, no trace of Isabel. Only a single scrap of paper curled like a dead leaf, damp but legible. 4 words in her hand. Keep it moving, W. Walter exhaled, not fully aware that he'd been holding his breath. His knees gave slightly, and he caught himself on the lip of the grave. He didn't speak for a long time. The paper crumpled in his hand, the ink bleeding where the snow touched it. Footsteps crunched behind him. He didn't turn. You shouldn't be here, he said flatly. I followed you, Rosie said. Your note sucked. He turned now. She was wearing a too-big coat, dragging a flashlight with a cracked lens. She pointed toward the tree line. There were lights over there, last night, a truck with no plates. I watched it. Walter's gaze narrowed. You're sure? I'm not blind. He nodded toward the open coffin. She's gone. I figured, Rosie said. They took her. Walter climbed out of the grave, bones aching from the cold. You saw it happen? Not the whole thing. Just shapes. 2 men. One lifted. The other held something shiny. Walter paused. Shiny? Metal? Could have been a shovel, or a pipe, or a gun. They stood in silence, breath ghosting between them. Walter turned and looked back down into the empty coffin. When I married her, she asked me what I feared most. Rosie didn't move. I said betrayal. That if someone I loved looked me in the eye and lied, I'd never recover. Did she lie? Walter shook his head. She left that note. Which says? He handed it to her. She read, then looked up. What does it mean? I think it means keep digging, he said. Behind them, a fresh gust stirred the trees. Rosie shifted, staring at the ground. There's blood on the fence, she said suddenly. Walter followed her gaze. Just beyond the path, near the stone wall that ringed the cemetery, a thin trail of dark red marked the snow. 3 drops, maybe 4, before vanishing into the brush. "Someone got hurt," Rosie said, "or wants us to think they did." They stood there a moment longer. Then a voice behind them said, "You're trespassing." Walter turned, shovel still in hand. A figure stood under the arched gate, flashlight in one hand, revolver in the other.
"Travis,"
Walter said with a tired smile.
"still on night duty?"
The man grunted. "You broke the latch." "I picked it," Walter said. "Same as you taught me. Fort Benning 68? Travis grunted again, this time with a touch of respect. "I'm not going to ask what you found." "Then don't," Walter replied. Travis lowered the light, though he didn't put away the gun. "Whatever's buried in this town, it's rarely where we think it is." He turned and walked off without another word. Walter stared after him. Rosie tugged his coat. "So what do we do?" Walter stared down at the open grave. He spoke quietly, like to the dirt itself. "If she walked away from this, if she left me buried with nothing but lies, I'll find her." "And if she didn't lie?" Rosie asked. He met her eyes. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life making peace with the man who let her." The snow was gone by morning, melted into the brittle grass and cracked stone that made up Walter's backyard. The sky remained grey, low and heavy, as though it too had something to confess. Inside the house, the silence pressed in closer than usual. Walter stood in the hallway, with a picture frame in his hands. Dust coated the glass. His fingers left streaks across Margaret's face as he wiped it. She was smiling in the photo, not broadly, not for the camera. Just that quiet, enduring smile she always wore when she thought no one was watching. "She always looked like she was waiting," he muttered. Rosie watched from the base of the stairs. "Why'd you take it down?" Walter looked over. "It made someone uncomfortable." "Who?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked into the den, the room that had once belonged to Margaret. It had become a catch-all over the years. Unread books, old invoices, empty picture hooks. He set the frame against the wall, leaning it on the sideboard, not ready to hang it just yet. "She lived in this house longer than anyone," he said. "She cleaned it, warmed it, and filled it with life. And I let her become a shadow." Rosie said nothing, just sat on the edge of the armchair, legs swinging slightly above the floor. Walter turned to the bookshelf and pulled a copy of Leaves of Grass, its spine cracked and worn. Margaret had loved this book. He flipped through it absently until something fell from the pages. A folded envelope, his name on the front, in her hand. He froze. The flap had never been sealed. The crease was faint, barely touched. He opened it slowly. "Walter, you never asked her name. I waited for you to ask. I thought maybe it would come one day, over breakfast or late at night when you couldn't sleep. But you never did. I don't blame you. I know what silence can cost, because I paid for it too. If one day you find this, and she's still around, maybe ask her name, maybe say it out loud." Walter sat down. The paper trembled in his hands. He read it twice, then a third time, as if the words would change. "Did she write that for me?" Rosie asked softly. He looked up. "What do you mean?" "She said, she's still around." "Was that about Isabel?" Walter didn't speak for a long moment. Then, "I think so." Rosie leaned forward. "So, Isabel was her daughter?" Walter nodded slowly. "It fits. There were signs. I just didn't want to see them." "Like what?" He glanced toward the mantel. "There's a photo somewhere." He rose and opened a drawer in the cabinet. It took some rummaging, but he pulled out a small box of loose photos, yellowed edges, curling corners. He flipped through quickly, pausing at one. It was Margaret, younger, in a corduroy jacket, standing in the snow. A girl beside her, maybe 5 years old, clutching her hand. Her face was turned sideways, but the eyes were unmistakable. Rosie looked over his shoulder. "That's her." Walter turned the photo over, faint handwriting in pencil. "Last winter, before we met. M." He pressed the photo flat on the table and leaned on his hands. "I didn't want a child," he said. "That's the truth. I told myself I was too old for it, too selfish. Margaret never pushed me. She said we could build something new, just us." Rosie looked at him with something between empathy and suspicion. "So you just forgot she existed?" "I tried." Rosie didn't say anything else, but she didn't need to. Later that day, Walter found himself at the edge of town, walking into the rusted gates of an old nursing home. "Visiting or admitting?" the receptionist asked. "Visiting." "Roy Campbell." She checked the log. "Room 204. He's still sharp, mostly." Walter nodded, made his way upstairs. Roy was sitting in a recliner, a crossword in his lap, and a magnifier clipped to his glasses. "Walter Sullivan," he said without looking up. "Haven't seen you in years. Thought you were dead or rich." "Little of both," Walter said, easing into the chair across from him. Roy looked up now. "What brings you?" "Margaret." Roy set the crossword aside. "She deserved better than what she got. I know. She told me about the girl. I asked her once if you'd ever accepted her." Walter's jaw tensed. "And?" "She said you made room in the house, but not in your heart." Walter nodded once, slowly. "She left me a letter." Roy's gaze softened. "She wrote a lot of those. Did she ever tell you the girl's name?" Roy leaned back. "She told me her name was Isabel, and she made me promise never to say a word unless you came asking." Walter let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "She said she was afraid, that if you knew you'd shut down, like a vault, and she'd rather have half your love than none." "I gave her less than half," Walter whispered. Roy didn't contradict him. Back at the house, the light was dimming. Rosie had lit the fire again. Walter stood in the hallway, staring at the blank space where Margaret's photo had once hung. He lifted the frame and, with careful hands, placed it back on the hook. He stepped back. "She's home," he said. Rosie looked up from the floor. "What was her name?" Walter smiled almost. "Margaret." "No, the girl's name. Her daughter." His voice cracked just slightly. "Isabel." Rosie looked into the fire. "Well," she said, "I think it's time we start saying it." The municipal building squatted at the edge of town like a forgotten courthouse. Ivy strangled, sun-bleached, and still somehow humming with the low rhythms of record-keeping. Inside, the air smelled of old ink and colder intentions. The ceiling lights buzzed with the kind of flicker that hinted nothing had changed in decades. Walter signed his name in the dusty logbook at the front counter. He didn't say much, didn't need to. Most people in town knew who he was, or at least who he used to be. The clerk on duty, an older woman with thick glasses and the poise of someone who'd survived 3 mayors, glanced up when he approached. "You're back," she said, "looking for some paperwork. Most men your age just come here to file complaints about potholes." "Maybe I'll do that next," Walter said. "Right now, I need the burial transfer records from the week of Isabel Sullivan's death." Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "I remember her service. Quiet. Private. Barely anyone there." He said nothing. She checked her terminal, typing like someone who still preferred a typewriter. "Normally, you'd need to be listed as next of kin to request those records." "I'm her husband." A long pause. Then, "That's not what the form says." Walter's brow creased. "Excuse me." She turned the screen slightly toward him. "Family contact listed here is a Lawrence Kane, signed as the legal point of coordination." "Who the hell is that?" "Don't know," she replied. But it's a notarized entry. Walter leaned closer. The date next to the entry, 1 day before the funeral. He stepped back, colder now than when he'd come in. Do you have time-stamped logs from the transport team? She nodded, slid a faded file across the desk. The numbers jumped out at him. Body released from hospital, 10:30 p.m. Arrived at funeral home, 1:15 a.m. Almost 3 hours, unaccounted for. Didn't think to ask what took so long, he murmured. She shrugged. I file what they give me. You want more than that, you'll need to ask the funeral home. He didn't thank her. Just left. Rosie was waiting outside, perched on the cold stone steps, fiddling with the strap of her backpack. You weren't supposed to come, Walter said. You walk like a man trying to disappear. I figured you'd need backup. He almost smiled. Find anything? Plenty. The funeral home was only a few blocks away. Its front was lined with neatly trimmed bushes and a flagpole that hadn't flown a flag in years. The bell over the door chimed once. Too soft, too rehearsed. Walter approached the front desk. The man behind it was Harry, balding, slightly slumped, and smelling faintly of cloves and bleach. Mr. Sullivan, Harry said, wasn't expecting you. Good. I need to see your security tapes. Harry blinked. That's not standard protocol. Neither is burying an empty coffin. Harry shifted, coughed into his sleeve. We do what the family instructs. Always. Walter stepped closer. Did you see the body, Harry? Yes. Walter's stare didn't move. Was she breathing? Harry broke eye contact. She looked dead, cold, still. That's all I needed. Walter reached into his coat and withdrew the name scribbled on the burial record. Lawrence Kane. Who is he? Harry hesitated. He came with her, claimed to be her cousin, had ID, documents. They matched. I don't ask questions. You should start. Rosie tugged at Walter's coat as they left the building. There's a camera at the back, she whispered. I saw the light blinking last time we were here. He followed her around the alley, where a hidden camera above the loading bay cast a tiny red dot over the ivy-covered brick. Walter rang the bell again. This time, Harry led them to the back office. The monitor setup looked like something from another decade, but the feed had been archived. Which night? Harry asked. Walter gave the date. Harry scrolled back, and there it was. At exactly 12:47 a.m., a black SUV pulled up to the back entrance. The back door of the vehicle opened. Isabel stepped out, on her own. She wore a long grey coat. Her face was pale but alert, alive. A man followed, tall, angular, face hidden beneath a flat cap and scarf. He carried a small box, red leather, brass clasp. Walter leaned closer. The box, his watch. He pressed pause. I want that footage, he said. Harry didn't argue. Back at the house, Rosie sat curled on the rug by the fire, arms wrapped around her knees. She walked away, she said, on her own. Walter stood at the window, watching the wind claw at the hedges. She didn't just walk away, she walked out with him. And with it. The watch? Walter nodded slowly. She used it to steal something more than money. What? My name, my trust, maybe even my silence. Rosie looked at the screen again. He wasn't your cousin, was he? No. Then who? Walter turned back toward her. I intend to find out. He started with the plate. The frame around the license had been barely visible in the video, but it was enough. Walter had contacts from his old days in logistics, people who remembered favors. 2 hours later, a call came. Cars registered to a Levi Crane, the voice said. Last known address is out in River's Edge. Something tells me he won't be there long. Something tells me I'll get there first, Walter replied. When he reached the house, The porch light was off. The driveway was empty. The front door hung half ajar. He stepped inside slowly. No sounds, no signs of life. A photo hung over the mantel. Isabel laughing. Younger, more radiant, unburdened. On the coffee table sat a medical intake form, half completed. The name, Isabel M. Kane. Next to it, a note. You were never meant to follow me this far. Walter picked it up. Behind him, a floorboard creaked. The floorboard groaned again. Walter froze. But no one came through the door. No sudden confrontation. Just the house breathing on its own, settling into stillness the way abandoned places often do. He turned back to the note in his hand. The ink was smooth, purposeful. Isabel had written it knowing he would come. She always knew how far he'd follow her. Even now. Back at the house, the fire had gone down to coals. Rosie sat with a book in her lap, one of Margaret's old sculpting manuals. She barely looked up when he returned. You were gone a while, she said. Walter placed the note and the intake form on the table without a word. He didn't remove his coat. His eyes were glassed over, unreadable. I found something, Rosie added quietly. That got his attention. I was cleaning the shelf in the garage, the ones with all the old tools and books. Thought I'd throw out what was rotting. Then I opened this. She handed him the sculpting book, dog-eared and stiff with time. From the middle, a thin sheet of folded paper slipped out. Walter caught it instinctively, Margaret's handwriting. He didn't open it right away. He stared at the page like it was ticking. I didn't mean to find it, Rosie said. He gave a faint nod and sat down. His fingers unfolded the letter slowly. The ink had bled in one corner, but the rest was sharp. Too sharp. Walter, there are truths I never trusted myself to say aloud. This is the one that has kept me awake the longest. Isabel is my daughter. I had her before I met you. I kept it from you, because I knew you would leave, or worse, stay, and never really see her. I thought if I could love you enough, the truth would shrink. But it only grew louder every year you looked past her name. If one day you ask, then maybe it's not too late. Walter's chest was constricted. He let the letter slide from his hands. Rosie reached toward him. Walter? But he had already slumped against the edge of the couch, hand gripping his knee for balance, breath caught somewhere between inhale and collapse. I loved her, he whispered. I loved her. Rosie waited, let the silence hold. And I hated her, he added, eyes wet now. But she was Margaret's girl, all this time. He covered his face with his hands. She lived under my roof. I shared my bed. I told myself she was mysterious, complicated. But I never once asked why she looked like someone I couldn't let go. Rosie spoke gently. Did Isabel know? I don't know, he rasped. God help me if she did, and worse if she didn't. She picked up the letter, read it in full, then folded it back with the kind of care usually reserved for ashes or folded flags. You weren't supposed to find this, Rosie said. But I think Margaret left it knowing one day you might need it more than she needed you to read it. He nodded faintly. The next morning, Walter made a quiet visit to Cedar Street, a small house with overgrown hedges and ceramic wind chimes that hadn't sung in years. An elderly woman opened the door, Liza, short, sharp-eyed, with an apron smudged with flour and memory. You're Walter, she said, not as a question. Yes. I suppose you've come for her. Margaret? She laughed once, not cruelly, but with the exhaustion of someone who'd waited too long. Number for the girl. They sat in her kitchen, sunlight slicing through yellow curtains, dust motes dancing like old secrets. I used to babysit Isabel, Liza said. When Margaret had to work the evening shift at the library, she'd drop her off with me and promise to be back before midnight. Walter stared into his untouched tea. Did she tell you to keep it from me? She didn't have to. You never asked. You wanted Margaret, but not the part of her that reminded her she'd lived before you. He looked away. I thought you knew, Liza added. All those years, the way Isabel looked at you, not like a daughter, but never fully like a stranger either. Something twisted, something she couldn't place. He flinched. You say that like it's something broken. I say it like it's something inevitable. That night, Walter returned home and sat in the den. He stared again at Margaret's photo, now back on the wall. Her gaze was soft, not forgiving, not accusing, just steady. He opened the drawer of the old writing desk and pulled out his will. He crossed out Isabel's name, but he didn't throw it away. Instead, he added a line beneath it. To Isabel, I leave the silence I should have broken, and the truth I should have asked for. Rosie entered the room as he set the pen down. She wasn't all bad, she said quietly. I know. She was broken, not evil, just left with too many lies inside her. He nodded, staring at the flames. Do you hate her? Rosie asked. I don't think I can afford to. Why not? Because then I'd have to hate myself first. Rosie stood beside him. Did she ever say your name? She asked. He blinked. Whose? Margaret's, Walter thought. Then, slowly, once, the first time she slept here. She had a dream. I came into the room, and she was crying, whispering a name. Rosie tilted her head. She said, Mom. He realized. Walter sat at the desk, Margaret's letter unfolded in front of him, like a wound reopened. Rosie's sketchbook hugged tight to her chest. I found an old photo, she said, stepping forward. It looked like her. Isabel, but smaller. I think she knew too. Walter turned sharp. Knew what? Rosie faltered. That she was Margaret's daughter. That you never asked. He stood too quickly. The chair screeched back. Don't you dare say that like you understand, he snapped. You know nothing about what I gave, or didn't. I didn't mean no, he cut in, louder. You don't get to dig through what's not yours. Just because I let you stay doesn't mean... He stopped. Too late. Rosie blinked. Her knuckles whitened around the sketchbook. Right, she said softly. Doesn't mean I belong. She turned and walked toward the door. Walter didn't stop her. The door clicked shut behind her like a verdict he hadn't meant to pass. And the silence that followed was the loudest he'd ever heard. The night wind dragged frost across the porch railings. Clouds moved low above the trees, heavy with the threat of another cold front. Inside the house, the fire had died again, leaving only the slow tick of the grandfather clock to fill the silence. Walter stood in the doorway to the den, holding a folded blanket in one hand. Rosie's shoes were gone. Her pack, too. The couch where she usually curled up was empty. His eyes moved to the front door, slightly ajar. He opened it fully. There she was, a small figure hunched beneath the porch steps, wrapped in a chafed wool blanket, her breath rising in bursts of silver. One hand clutched a red apple, the other rested on a scrap of paper weighed down with a small stone. Walter stepped forward, picked up the note. Thank you for the fire. I didn't want to ruin anything more. His hand trembled, not from the cold. He crouched, lifted the blanket, and found her eyes open, dry, wide, and blank. I'm sorry, he said. She didn't answer. He reached out slowly, brushing snow from her hat. I told you to leave. I was wrong. Still no response. So he bent down and, with a grunt, lifted her into his arms. She didn't resist, just folded into him, bonier and lighter than he'd imagined, like something barely tethered. Inside, he placed her gently on the couch and wrapped her in the thickest quilt he could find. The fire crackled back to life as he fed it wood with shaking hands. Rosie didn't speak, until her cheeks flushed again. "Do you want me gone?" she asked, voice flat. "Number..." My mind was not clear at that time. She looked at him, cautious. "Would you say that, even if I wasn't cold?" He sat on the edge of the hearth, elbows on his knees. "I've said the wrong thing so many times, and worse. I've said nothing at all when people needed to hear something." She didn't push further, just listened. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling. "I married a woman who gave everything quietly. I loved her, but I never opened the drawer she kept her real life in. Then I married her daughter, without knowing, without asking. And I spent years wondering why love felt like quicksand." Rosie watched him. "You?" he said finally. "You're the only one I never tried to reshape. You came here small and honest and cold, and I didn't ask you to be more than that." She tugged the blanket up to her chin. "If I was your daughter, would you make me leave?" He turned to her. The fire painted one side of her face in gold and shadow. "No," he said. "I'd tell you to stay, because I'd want to do better." She swallowed. He moved closer and placed the back of his hand on her forehead. Warm. "There's more life in your skin," he said quietly, "than I ever felt sleeping beside Isabel, and more stillness in your voice than I deserve to be trusted with." She leaned toward him slightly. "If I stay," she whispered, "can I be a little girl again?" Walter blinked, caught off guard. "No one's ever asked me that." "I think I forgot how." He nodded slowly. "Then we can learn together." The next day, he made 2 cups of tea, one strong and bitter, one pale with too much milk. He toasted bread and buttered both slices unevenly. Rosie sat at the table, legs swinging above the floor, as if it had always been hers. After breakfast, they cleaned the shed. She found a faded blue box in the back, tucked behind a broken sled. Inside were baby clothes, unopened toys, and a pair of tiny green gloves. "Were these yours?" she asked. Walter didn't answer for a moment. "Number." "They were meant for someone who never arrived." Rosie nodded, as if that made perfect sense. That afternoon, a woman named Clara stopped by. The neighborhood nurse. She had once treated Rosie's mother and had heard whispers that the girl had found shelter. "She doesn't speak much about the bad months," Clara said, after Walter invited her in. "But she never stopped drawing. Always little houses with lights on." Walter glanced toward the kitchen, where Rosie now sat, sketching quietly. Clara placed a hand on his shoulder. "I can help with guardianship papers, if that's where this is going. You don't have to decide today." "I already did," Walter said. That evening, Rosie fell asleep on the couch, one arm wrapped around a book of old fairy tales Walter had dug up from the attic. He pulled the blanket higher, then sat nearby, reading by the firelight. Her breathing was steady, her cheeks pink again. When the clock struck 10, she stirred. "Walter?" she murmured. "Yes." "Do I have to call you anything else?" He smiled gently. "You call me what you need to." She hesitated. "Would it be weird if I said, Grandpa?" He closed the book. "No," he said. "It'd be the first time anyone ever did." She smiled, not broadly, but enough. The morning fog settled thick across the back fields. From the window, the trees looked like silhouettes half remembered from a dream. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, sharp, directionless, and soon swallowed by quiet. Walter held the envelope flat against the table. The handwriting was old, but the return address was fresh. Gil Noland, an old friend from a life where things were simpler, or maybe just more blurred. He'd mailed the report yesterday. Walter had called him on a whim, not to chase Isabel, just to know. Now, the envelope sat unopened beside his tea. Rosie was still asleep upstairs. She'd asked for a nightlight. He'd found one shaped like a lighthouse in the attic and screwed in a working bulb. She'd fallen asleep within minutes. He broke the seal slowly, like opening something sacred. Inside, 2 pages. The first was a summary of movement. Isla M. Kane, aged 37, believed to be an alias. Lived briefly in New Mexico. Took a night job at a motel outside Albuquerque under a false ID. Stayed less than 2 weeks. The second page held a grainy black and white still. Isabel, thinner, eyes bruised by something time hadn't healed, standing at a pawn shop counter. In her hand, a red leather box. The clasp opened. She looked nothing like the woman who once wore silk in his dining room. Walter studied the photo for a long time. Then he turned it over. A handwritten note in Gill's blocky print. She didn't sell it. Left it there overnight. Then came back and took it. The owner said she looked like someone who thought she'd done something terrible and wanted to do worse, but couldn't. Walter closed the file and pressed his palm over it. That afternoon, Rosie helped him sweep out the tool shed. Dust hung in the air, like ghosts, too bored to scare anyone. She found a jar of old nails and a cracked marble. "Did you build things out here?" she asked. "I tried," he said. "Mostly, I just started and never finished." "Why?" He shrugged. "Maybe I was waiting for the right reason." Rosie turned the marble in her palm. "Do you miss her?" He knew who she meant. "I miss what I thought she could have been," he said. "Not who she was." Walter didn't answer right away. Then, "She was Margaret's child, but not Margaret, and I think she never forgave me for knowing that." Later, they sat on the porch. The sky was open now, a soft wash of autumn blue. Walter held the photo again. Rosie leaned against the railing. "Did you find her?" "In a way." She turned to him. "What will you do now?" "I wrote her a letter. Can I see it?" He hesitated, then handed it over. Rosie opened it carefully, like a borrowed confession. "Isabel, I know now. About everything. And I don't need you to explain. You were shaped by things I never asked about. I should have. That's on me. If you're still running, I hope you find a place to stop, and someone who sees you without asking for a reason to stay. You never had to be my daughter, but I hope you find someone who lets you be whole." Walter Rosie folded the letter, eyes dry but thoughtful. "She'll read it," she said. "I hope so," he replied, "but I won't wait on it." That evening, Clara came by again with papers in a manila envelope. Guardianship forms. Not final. Just first steps. Rosie waited by the table, chin resting on her folded arms. Walter looked over the first page. He filled out her name, Rosalind May Archer. Under relation, he paused. Clara leaned in. "You don't have to define it yet, but if you don't mind me saying, she already has." Walter looked at Rosie. She gave a tiny smile, the one she saved for truths that scared her less. He wrote, "Legal guardian," signed the date. Clara nodded. "You'll need a notary for the final step. I'll arrange it." When she left, Rosie stayed quiet for a while. Then, "What does it mean now?" "It means," Walter said, "you stay. For good." That night, Rosie brought a folded piece of paper to the fire. "I drew something." He adjusted his reading glasses and opened them. A crayon sketch of the house, warm lights, smoke from the chimney, and 2 stick figures at the porch, one tall, one small. A dog, too, imaginary for now. He pointed. "That me?" "Yes." "What's my name?" She bit her lip. "Grandpa," he nodded. "What's yours?" She looked at him. "Rosie," he smiled. "Not Rosalind. Only when I'm in trouble." They both laughed. Walter stayed up later than usual. He stood by the fireplace, photo of Isabel in hand, the one from the pawn shop camera. He placed it gently in the fire. Watched the edges curl, then vanish into orange. Rosie peeked around the corner. "Did you burn something?" "Yes." "Was it bad?" "No," he said. "Just done." She came over, leaned into his side. "Do you think she ever wanted to stay?" she asked. "I think she didn't know how." They watched the last ember fade. The next morning, Walter found a card in his coffee mug. It read, "You didn't have to look for her, but you did. You didn't have to keep me, but you did." That's the difference between memory and home. He didn't ask how she knew the right words. Some things you just feel. Morning light drifted sideways through the front windows, pale and unhurried. It stretched across the wooden floor in soft rectangles, casting gentle warmth against the wall Walter had left bare for too long. Dust floated in the beams, like breath held still. Walter stood at the center of the living room, holding the frame in both hands. Margaret's photograph, the one he had taken down the day Isabel moved in. For a while, he told himself it was about space, then about moving on. Then, eventually, he stopped telling himself anything at all. Behind him, Rosie sat on the rug, flipping through a box of colored pencils. "You're putting her back?" she asked without looking up. "I should never have taken her down," he replied. He stepped onto the small wooden stool and hung the frame back where it used to be, eye level, center of the wall, the same place it had always belonged. The glass caught the morning glow. Margaret looked just as she had when the photo was taken, hands folded, mouth half smiling, eyes clear and full of some patient truth. Walter stepped back and folded his hands behind him. "She kept this house running," he said, "even when I didn't notice. She made space for me, for everything I didn't know how to carry." Rosie looked up now. "And you?" "I gave her silence, the worst kind, the kind that sounds like peace until you realize it's just someone refusing to ask." She rose and came to stand beside him. "Does putting her back mean you remember her now?" "I never forgot. I just buried her differently." That afternoon, Walter opened the drawer in his writing desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of parchment. No letterhead, no templates, just paper and a pen that felt too elegant for his stiff fingers. Rosie peeked in. "Writing another letter? A will? To who?" "To you." She blinked. "But I'm not." "You are," he said gently. "Because I said so. That's what makes family. Saying it and meaning it." He began to write, slow and deliberate. The scratch of the pen filled the silence. "To whom it may concern. Everything I have, everything that remains, goes to Rosalind May Archer. She is the child who stayed when I had nothing left to offer. She is the proof that love is not built from blood, but from the hands that stay steady when the world tips. To Rosie, the heir of my heart. Blood is not required, only the willingness to see someone alive again." When he finished, he signed his name at the bottom, beneath the date, then sat back and exhaled like someone closing a chapter. Rosie stepped closer. "Do I get to sign something too?" Walter smiled. "Not for the law, but if you want to, we'll find a space." She took a crayon from her pocket and drew a tiny sun in the corner of the page. Later, Clara returned to finalize the guardianship. She wore a cardigan full of lint and a face full of purpose. Walter handed her the handwritten will. "You'll say it's not official." Clara read it once, then again. "It's not, but it's the kind people remember." She took the guardianship papers, placed them gently on the table, and looked toward Rosie. "Got any questions?" she asked. Rosie shrugged. "Will I have to stop drawing?" "No," Clara smiled. "You might just have to draw a little faster. People tend to grow when they feel safe." After she left, Rosie stood at the foot of the wall where Margaret's photo now hung. Her eyes narrowed, studying the space beneath it. "I think it needs something," she said. "What?" She pulled a small sketch from her pocket, a pencil drawing of Margaret seated in a chair, hands clasped in her lap, a window behind her spilling sunlight across her shoulder. "I drew her from your photo," Rosie said. "But I added light coming from this room." Walter took the drawing, blinked once, and cleared his throat. "She'd like that," he said. They pinned it beneath the photo, just above the handwritten will. That night, the fire burned low again. They sat in the den, Walter in his old armchair, Rosie curled up in the blanket with her sketchbook. "Can I ask something?" she said. "Anything. If one day I grow up and leave, will you be mad?" He turned toward her, not smiling, but certain. "Number, as long as you remember where the light falls in this house." She looked at him for a long time. "Will it always fall the same?" "No," he said, "but you'll always know where it used to." She nodded and drew something small in the margin of her paper. He didn't ask what. Before bed, Walter stood once more in front of the wall. Margaret's photo, Rosie's drawing, the will, a triptych, legacy not as law, but as gesture. His house had changed shape, not with renovations or new furniture, but with something simpler, names spoken aloud and silences no longer left to rot. The next morning, Rosie placed a new card on the breakfast table. This one read, "Families aren't made by blood. They're made when someone sees you're quiet and calls it home." Love, Rosie Walter poured her tea first. No one ever had before. The night was quiet enough to hear the clock tick. Not the grandfather one in the hall, that had long stopped, but a small kitchen clock Walter hadn't noticed in years. Its hands moved steady and soft, like it was keeping time for something other than the hours. Outside, frost lined the porch rail. Inside, Rosie had fallen asleep in the big armchair near the fire, curled into herself like a comma at the end of a sentence. Walter watched her from the kitchen doorway, one hand cradling a chip mug, the other stirring warm milk and cocoa with a spoon that clinked gently against ceramic. He didn't rush. He let the smell rise, sweet and soft, filling the corners of the house like something it had long been missing. He brought the cup to the small side table and set it down without a sound. Then he reached for the old wool blanket folded across the back of the sofa. Margaret's. The corners were frayed, but the weight of it was just right. He draped it over Rosie's shoulders, tucking the ends in loosely. She stirred a little, not waking. Her lips parted slightly. A small breath escaped, and a word. "Don't leave me out there." Walter froze. The fire popped in the hearth. He crouched beside her, brushed a few strands of hair away from her cheek, and whispered low, "You're not out there anymore. You're home." He stayed like that for a long moment, kneeling beside the child who had wandered into his life like an echo, and become something far more real. Then he rose, crossed the room, and opened the drawer in the cabinet near the front hall, the one he hadn't touched since the funeral. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay the imitation, the pocket watch. It ticked perfectly, always had, but it wasn't the one passed down, the one with myth wrapped around its edges. That one was gone, lost to the past, or maybe returned to it. Walter lifted the imitation, thumbed the latch, and opened it. Inside, nothing. No engraving, no story. He snapped it shut. Back in the living room, Margaret's photograph hung where it should have always been, centered, unobstructed, clean. Below it, Rosie's drawing of her, eyes soft, window light falling across her shoulders. And beneath that, Walter's handwritten will, corners now gently curled, a crayon sun smiling from the bottom right. Walter placed the watch at the base of the frame. A quiet offering. A surrender. "I built too much around what I thought made me worthy," he said aloud, "and almost nothing around what actually did." The next morning, Rosie woke to find the house silent, except for the scrape of toast on a plate and the bubbling hum of the kettle. A cup of cocoa sat beside her again, still warm. She reached for it, then noticed a folded piece of paper on the table in front of her. For Rosie, written in Walter's hand. Inside, "Some people pass things down in blood, others in land. I pass down this house, these mornings, and everything's soft. I never thought I'd have the courage to keep. Thank you for staying. W." That afternoon, Clara came by one last time, this time just for tea. She sat by the fire while Rosie drew at the kitchen table. "There's a stillness in this house now," Clara said, sipping slowly. "It used to feel like someone was holding their breath." Walter nodded. "Now it just exhales." She reached into her bag and pulled out the notarized guardianship certificate. "You're official now, all the way." Walter took the document, glanced at it, then folded it in half and slid it into the desk drawer. "Funny," he said. "The paper feels like the least important part." Clara smiled. "The ones that matter always do." That night, Rosie fell asleep early, the cocoa untouched this time, her arms wrapped around a sketch pad with half-finished drawings of windows and chairs and hands. Hands holding other hands. Walter sat alone in the den. No books open, no letters to write. Just him. And quiet. He looked at the wall again. Margaret. The drawing. The will. The watch. A line, top to bottom. Memory. Recognition. Rebirth. He rose and stood in front of it. He placed one hand gently on the glass of Margaret's photo, the other on the edge of the desk. His voice was soft. "I used to think legacy was something earned in business. In names, printed on things. In what people owed you when you were gone." He exhaled. "But you taught me that legacy is what stays warm after everything else goes cold." The fire had burned low again. He threw on another log, stirred the coals, then moved to the chair beside Rosie and sat. She stirred in her sleep. He didn't speak, just reached out and laid a hand across her blanket, felt the rise and fall of her breathing beneath it. Safe, small, steady. The room was still, the house finally full. He looked toward the window, where frost had just started to form at the edges of the glass. Delicate. White. Inside, the warmth held. And in that hush, that soft exhale of an ending, Walter thought, "I once buried my conscience. And a child, not mine by blood, not mine by promise, helped me dig it up and keep it warm."